All right, welcome back to another episode of Just Buy Less Coffee, answering the deeper questions of American politics. My name is Troy, aka Keep Troy Blue. With me, as always, is Cathy Cannon, aka Cannon's Fodder. Donald Trump is a convicted felon at long last. We can say that, convicted by a jury of his peers in the New York porn star hush money case. And we're going to get to that.
I can't believe this is real. This is something we're really talking about. Like, it's just
the case where he was farting himself awake at trial while Stormy Daniels testified about their sexual liaisons. So now we have a convicted felon running for president in the United States of America in 2024. What is going to happen? We will find out. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the show. I want to run through a couple of other news stories, Biden ceasefire proposal, and some OPEC oil stuff later at the end of the show. Cathy's going to grace us with one of her wonderful analysis of the generations. We're going to do a little deep dive on some generational conflict, which is like Cathy's bread and butter. It's how I found Cathy, because she's good at that stuff. So she's going to give us a little bit of that later on in the show. But first, this Biden ceasefire proposal in Gaza, in Israel. Biden laying down a proposal to end the war in Gaza. Some really, really interesting stuff here from a historical perspective about what's in this deal. So it's a multi-phase sort of ceasefire, end of the war deal. Hamas is actually on board with it. It's actually waiting for Israel to come along. But basically, it's a multi-phase. The first phase would be a 6-week ceasefire to coincide with the withdrawal of Israeli military from Gaza and a prisoner exchange. Then the return of all hostages held by Hamas, and a cessation of hostilities. And the final phase is a major reconstruction plan of Gaza and a coordinated return of displaced Palestinians to their homes. That part is unbelievable to me, that if that goes through, if Israel coordinates that, not only a pullout of troops, but a massive reconstruction campaign, which is basically like, the Marshall Plan, which is like what they should be doing. I mean, this is like, this is how we used to, this is how we built ourselves on the world stage after World War II. We destroyed Germany and Japan, and then we rebuilt them. And now Germany and Japan are two of our biggest allies and two of the most successful nations on earth. And they have no reason to hate us, even though we destroyed their entire country and killed, millions of their people. But this is what you do. This is how you win hearts and minds. This is how you destroy Hamas, really, is by rebuilding Gaza and making it, not an open air prison and giving these people rights. Anyway, I just think that aspect of the deal, if it goes through, is really, really fascinating. We'll get into some politics of it, but what are your initial thoughts on this ceasefire proposal here from Biden, Cathy? Hamas reacting positively to it, calling Biden by name, saying the American president, we like what he's laying down.
It's an interesting one. The most interesting thing to me is, and I think you have it in the outline as well, but Bibi's on board with it. I think Hamas is on board with it, but Bibi's government, like his party, is not.
Yeah.
And that is going to be really interesting to see play out, because there's like a Mike Johnson moment in the making, from what I understand, is that the opposition government has basically been like, we'll save your job if you agree to this ceasefire, which is very, very similar to Democrats. Like, we're done with your fucking games, Marjorie, right? So we're going to save this fucking crazy ass speaker just so the government can keep working. And that is, that is a big deal.
It's interesting. Yeah. So Bibi himself has been kind of waffling on it. The first thing we got was that it was actually like Bibi's proposal. And then Biden laid it down and Bibi went like, whoa, I didn't say that. So he's kind of flip-flopping on it and waffling on it. It's because the right wingers in his party do not want this deal at all. They want this war to continue until basically the Palestinians are wiped off the face of the earth. Yair Lapid, who's the sort of the centrist, center-left leader of the opposition party, like you said that their members will back the deal. So this is the opposition party, so they don't usually, they don't have an alliance with Bibi, but they said they would back the deal if the right wing does not, so that it could have enough votes to pass. Mass demonstrations in the streets in favor of it. Really interesting. Someone carrying a sign saying Biden saved them from Netanyahu.
Yeah,
I'm assuming
actually, I
talking
saw
about
that.
the Palestinians or the hostages or somebody, but that was an interesting.
Well, actually, when I saw that, and I went looking, and keep in mind, I'm like a little rusty brain because I've been in teacher recovery mode. But we know that there had been a lot of Israeli uprisings and protests about Bibi starting the war,
Right.
continuing the war, and the brutality of the war. And it's been largely Bibi that's killed most of the ceasefire negotiations that have taken place. So I kind of took that as the Israeli people, not like it, like they want Biden to do something about Bibi for them, not
Okay.
necessarily for the hostages. Does that make sense? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
they want Biden to like support this ceasefire. They want the opposition party to force Bibi into doing it because they know that will limit his control and ultimately free them from his leadership, get him out of power. Like keep him around long enough to get through the deal, then let his party, like once the ceasefire is in place, let his party go after him and then step into that role. Like I think when
Yeah.
I said, and I've said this a whole lot, and I know that it's easy to look at Joe Biden and be like, "Oh, sleepy Joe, oh, well, muscly old man, oh, shuffling through the world or whatever." But like when it comes to diplomacy, he's fucking Tywin Lannister sometimes. Like he is so good at knowing what is going to happen and so good at getting people to do what he needs them to do, right? Because we talked about in the last episode before Memorial Day, right? Like how there was that deal that he's got with the regional partners in the area, bringing Saudi Arabia into the fold,
Yeah.
right? If he
Yeah.
can get the opposition party of the Israeli parliament to back this ceasefire deal, protecting Netanyahu, right? While that other agreement, like, it's very likely that like stability to this region of the world is within reach prior to the like the November election.
Yeah.
And that's going to be
Yeah.
quite the contrast when you've got Donald Trump throwing a tantrum about his convictions and making everything like I'm better than Biden in this and my crowds are better than Biden here and I'm more handsome than Biden and more people like me than Biden. Meanwhile, Joe Biden's like, so Saudi Arabia is a new regional ally. We've normalized relations with Israel and we're rebuilding Gaza for the Palestinian people. And Donald Trump will be like, I didn't fuck a porn star. That's just fake news. Like it's going to be quite
Joe
the
Biden is
dichotomy.
categorically more handsome than Donald Trump. Just laying that out there,
Young
but
Joe
yeah,
Biden,
Bibi's really at a
especially.
crossroads here. This kind of feels like the first sort of major turning point. You have the recognition of the state of Palestine happening all over the world, which is really focused on the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, I think, not Hamas. I don't know that. I'm very interested to see how this will play out if the world, in order to end this conflict, recognizes a Palestinian government, but it's not Hamas, how Hamas kind of plays into that. I don't know if Hamas is just so bloodied right now. They're just in survival mode. But I would be very interested to see how Hamas inserts itself into those negotiations. But you also have Bernie Sanders calling Benjamin Netanyahu a war criminal and saying he won't attend his. They're still inviting Benjamin Netanyahu to come speak to a joint session of Congress. I don't know if that's actually going to happen.
Okay, I'm actually a little bit curious about that. Can I put my tinfoil hat
Yeah,
on?
yeah.
You
Or
know how like
you think they're gonna rub him out when he gets here? Is that what
I
you're?
no, I think they might arrest him.
Hmm, interesting.
The ICC has issued warrants for him, yeah. And like,
Yeah,
will America arrest him? No, but may he find his way into somewhere that would? Who knows? Who knows?
maybe. I mean,
Oh,
the ICC has no enforcement ability. I mean, you'd have to get him out of his country and, maybe do something. I don't know.
and the minute he's out
Uh,
of his country, he's fair game to anybody who wants to, take him into. Now, like, could the American government be like, no, you can't take him while he's here. We'll protect him. Sure, they could, but they could also not. Like, they could
Yeah.
also. Now, do I really think that'll happen? No, but do I like to live in a world where it could? Of course I do, because sometimes I like to. I will say I've won my dad over to the Kate Middleton is dead camp. But that's
What?
another
We've
conspiracy.
already resolved that though.
Sure.
She made a video. You
Yeah,
still think
I
Kate Middleton
don't.
is dead, even though she's like,
Look,
uh-huh.
I love me a good royal conspiracy, is all I'll say.
Well, anyway, the Bibi, so is this the end of Benjamin Netanyahu? I mean, is he going to go along with this? He could go along with this deal right now. He has the opposition support, save his job, basically, save his job, maybe lose his party, maybe get kicked out of his party or become like a have to establish himself as like that's the way these systems work. Is, I mean, he could just create his own fucking party. He's already done it once. Or Ariel Sharon did it. Ariel Sharon left the party and created his own little deal. Netanyahu could do that. Netanyahu could also be a dick and just keep going. I don't know. At that point, does he get no confidence out of there and lose his job? And I don't know. It's just the politics of it is just really fascinating to me.
The politics of it is weird too, because what you also have to remember is that in a very, very Trumpian way, Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to keep his job so he doesn't go to jail. Because
that's true.
Remember,
I mean, he's in war criminal status, so I mean, it's a tenuous situation.
No, not even just the war criminal thing. Like before any of this, he was facing bribery and corruption charges and was facing a prison sentence. And like like a little bit here, you can't like charge a sitting president, you can't serve or charge a sitting prime minister. So he's desperate to cling to his position because the second he doesn't have that position anymore, he's in court on corruption and bribery charges. Not to mention the warrant from the International Criminal Court. So I feel like I don't know what I think for Bibi, okay, what might be happening, and again, this is all going to be behind the scenes stuff, so this is literally just like speculation on my part, be very clear, but like, could it be like I'll agree to the deal if you tell the ICC to back off and like rescind the warrant on me?
He could like save his own ass mode kind of thing.
Yeah, like, okay, Joe Biden, I'll take this deal, but you need to, use your clout with the ICC to tell everybody to rescind the warrants they have issued on me. And okay, fine, whatever. I don't care. I don't fucking care. Like, you'll go to prison in your own country. That's cool with me. I don't give a shit.
Netanyahu kind of only has the support of the extremists at this point. There's a lot of moderate Jews that are no longer on the Netanyahu bandwagon here, supporting this Biden deal. I don't know. The rebuilding of Gaza thing is absolutely, if that coincides with the recognition of a Palestinian state, and I don't know. I think this could be huge. It could fizzle out and be nothing, or it could be really huge. But it does remind, speaking of Ariel Sharon, it does remind me of Ariel Sharon when like he bucked his party and pulled the settlers out of the West Bank. The right wingers went absolutely fucking apeshit, and he was kicked out of the party and had to start his own movement. So there is precedent for this, for sort of bucking the right wingers.
I'd like to point out the commonality of it always being right-wingers that are pushing illegal settlements, illegal invasions, and illegal wars. Can I just, it was right-wingers in America that started 2 fucking wars in the Middle East. It's right-wingers in Israel that are trying to steal the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. It's right-wingers in America right now that are trying to elect a fucking convict. It's, it's fine. Can we all please notice?
Meanwhile, Donald Trump is meeting with massive like AIPAC donors who are saying the conditions of their support is that he would back the Israeli annexation of the West Bank. So we could go that direction too. We could go like the complete opposite direction. But yeah, right wing populism, right, Cathy? Like the history of populism.
Populism is
it's crazy.
Yeah, and I've said this for a long time. Like, populism tends to show up in times of tense social and economic
times of great stress.
Well, yeah, there you go. There's a good way of putting it, right? And like the last populist era, the real populist era that you can point to really in the United States. Well, arguably, some people tried to make the claim that Obama had a populist appeal, but really that was just like, hey, the economy exploded. Vote for me instead.
He had the hopey changey thing going on with him.
Yeah, the hopey changey thing. That's just standard issue politics to me. But it was the William Jennings Bryan era, the late 19th century, right? When the gold silver thing, it was after like 3 economic crises, right? It was like, hold on, I put the years in here so I would remember. Where did I put it? I know it's in here somewhere. Yeah, so there's the Panic of 1837, the Panic of 1873, and the Panic of 1893. So it was.
Why don't we call these things panics anymore? We the Panic of 2008. That'd be so much cooler than like.
No, now it's just Great Depressions and Great Recessions. We got all whatever. But it was after that. It was like obviously the financial like situation in this country isn't great. I'll throw a fucking fish hook to the fucking crazies in the South. There were economic realities to the Civil War as well. Those economic realities being, we need slavery, we're too poor to pay them, but like economic realities all the same, right?
We don't want to work.
And
We're sitting here on our porch sipping mint juleps, and you want us to go to get a fucking job? Like, fuck you.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So like, and then 1873, that was a lot of the Reconstruction era economic conflicts, right? So 37 was the lead up to the Civil War. 73 was the aftermath of the Civil War. And 1893 was the Industrial Revolution, pointing out to like large gaps in wealth inequality. You know, these things should all sound familiar. Whatever. But that kind of sparked the populist era. And William Jennings Bryan showed up with all of he was the Donald Trump of his time. And I have said for the longest time that like Donald Trump is what William Jennings Bryan would have been. And it's very good historically that William Jennings Bryan didn't win, because would that have been bad. Yeah. But populism does tend to fade out, because populism tends to be erratic. It tends to be chaotic. It tends to be reactionary, whereas progressivism is usually born out of similar economic and social frustrations, but tends to be more pragmatic and solution oriented. Populism is very burn the motherfucker down. Progressivism is very build a better future. So what I'm saying is we've been in our populist era. I'm speaking Taylor Swift here. Perhaps it's time for a progressive era. But if you want more
tour coming,
the Eras tour, there you go. That'd be funny. But if you want more on populism, let me know, and we can make that our deep dive segment next week. Because
talk populism to me. That sounds good.
Yeah, there we go. And
wasn't William Jennings Bryan Woodrow Wilson's Secretary of State? And
I think that might have been
just fucking shit up.
Maybe. Yeah. I just know that it brought us a Teddy Roosevelt, and we know how badly I want another Teddy Roosevelt. So.
We should just do a Teddy deep dive, because the contradictions and complexities of Teddy Roosevelt are insane. Like total like warmonger, you know, basically like just took Hawaii, Philippines, and Guam and Cuba just because
for funsies. Just for funsies. Yep.
Just for funsies. Yeah. But also this great like totally revolutionized how we view like worker protections in this country and saving the environment. It's like really like the beginning of like the type of liberalism that we see today. All started with that guy.
It's always really funny when I talk to people about it. I was like, but you have to understand, somebody on TikTok who was yelling at me like for supporting Biden or whatever is not the progressive position, whatever. Progressives don't like war or something. And I'm like, I don't know who you know in the progressive history of America that didn't like war, but let me clue you in on something. By virtue of being an American politician, you're team war. Like, I know that sounds, and it's fair to not like that reality. And should that be our reality? No. Should we work to change it? Yes. But like America and profiting off of war, kind of our jam, man. Yeah. It's sort of our brand. Speaking of the Marshall Plan, right? Like, like it's from Lend-Lease to Marshall Plans to stealing the South Pacific. It is our jam.
So interesting sort of developments. We'll see what ball's in Bibi's court, basically. On this one. Hamas is on board, which is, I mean, anytime you have like Hamas being like, yes, we used to thank you, Mr. President, for your, doing this. That's pretty crazy. Speaking of Biden wins, so OPEC is announcing that they are going to allow for some rollback in their production cuts. OPEC is speaking of the Middle East and Saudi Arabia, OPEC is the Organization for Petroleum Exporting Countries, alliance of small oil-rich nations, sort of led by Saudi Arabia. We don't get a ton of our oil from OPEC, but they still do have a hold over the global oil market. They've been in production cut mode since the pandemic. That's sort of been their strategic reality for the last few years, driving up the price of a barrel of oil. They sort of waffle back and forth between increasing production to compete on a corporate level, but also holding back production so that they can make oil a scarcity and drive up the cost. They kind of go back and forth. They waffle on that. Announcing this week that they're going to allow certain nations, most notably the United Arab Emirates, to phase out their production cuts starting in September. Starting in the fall of an election year, you're going to see production increases of oil and probably the price of gas go down. So that's one of my favorite accounts on Twitter said that Biden's campaign was in God mode because you had oil futures just tanking yesterday on this announcement. I mean, the price of gas could go down just on the speculation of increased oil production. So that's pretty
I have
crazy.
so many thoughts. I have so many.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, Biden's engineering a ceasefire. Trump's getting convicted, and now we're going to see gas prices hopefully fall off like the month before the election in October.
Well, I also don't know if you noticed, but very, very recently, the U.S. opened up 3 million barrels from the Strategic Oil Reserve.
Yeah.
For a very similar reason. And I feel like Saudi Arabia's response here is to that. Because for those who don't know, right, America's Strategic Oil Reserve is our little mini OPEC, if you will. And I've tried explaining this to the kids when they say, well, why do we just keep all of this oil in reserve? And we're like, well, because let's just say the world catches fire, right? And the Middle East becomes embroiled in conflict, which is not outside the realm of possibility. Well,
because that's never happened.
Right, because that's never happened. That could, severely impact oil production and therefore oil prices. So if we just have this stockpile of oil while the major oil producing countries in the world can't be producing their oil, well, look at us here. We have the solution to, one, make sure that we can all keep gas in our cars, but two, make fuck tons of money off the oil we've just been kind of hoarding in a warehouse somewhere, right? So I think Biden saying, fine, I'll just go into my oil reserves, fuck you guys, makes them go, okay, don't, no, how about we help you out? Because
wait.
Right, because part two of this is, I think, perhaps because I don't know if you've heard, but I've mentioned European politics a lot here, but European countries are freaking the fuck out that Donald Trump might get reelected.
Oh yeah.
And contingency plans are in place for what a world post-U.S. leadership looks like. And that is not great because, for those who don't know, whenever a European country, for example, tends to be top dog in the world, that ends poorly for most people everywhere. Right? So if I'm the Saudi Arabian prince or the monarchy and I'm like, I can handle Joe Biden. I don't think I can handle Europe abandoning America. I don't think I want to have to deal with the new European or the new UK government because they're holding elections, oddly enough, July 4th. How fucking funny is that?
Yeah, that's weird. That's very weird.
I love a little bit that Happy Treason Day is also Kick Out the Tory Day. They finally have their own.
If they just get absolutely annihilated on the election on July 4th, that is going to be some.
They'll have finally, in solidarity with our British counterparts, we can all set off fireworks because whatever, it's fine. We're all free of the crazy. But that's kind of the point. There's a new king in England. There's about to be a new government in England. Okay, so in the UK, right? So that's fine. The European Union is consolidating power and kind of putting either Germany or France in charge. And that's always fun. So if I'm Saudi Arabia and I see all of this, right? I see Putin trying to take Ukraine. I see the European Union consolidating and putting, the Germans in charge. And I love the Germans. It's fine. They bombed my granddad's house, though. Right? Just for the point.
You categorically do not love Germans. I'm just going to put that out there.
No, I mean, I do. I don't have any problem with them. I just know historically Germany gets a little bit of power. And what is it? There's a joke from Eddie Izzard. So they celebrate with a world war and lose the whole fucking empire by the end of the war, right? That is what they do. So if they get all of this power, will they celebrate with a world war? And I don't want to see that happen. And I don't think Saudi Arabia wants to see that happen too. So I think a lot of people are hedging their bets here, and Saudi Arabia among them. And basically, if we could do anything to keep Donald Trump from becoming president, perhaps we should, because Biden's a little bit more reasonable to work with, because post-conviction Donald Trump is very different than first-term Donald Trump. And he is out for, I don't know, revenge at this point, and Saudi Arabia has worked well with the Biden administration, and Donald Trump is stupid enough to declare not necessarily like official war, but like petulant, petty war with Saudi. Like, let's just say, I think a lot of people globally are a little bit like,
Yeah.
stepping up to ensure that like Donald Trump goes away.
Well, I mean, could Saudi Arabia be throwing more of their chips into the Joe Biden, re-election? I mean, they're making this huge deal with Biden. They're making moves to recognize Israel at Biden's behest. I mean, we're sitting here talking about like assisting them building the civilian nuclear program. I mean, this is like the kingdom, the oil kingdom. They may be making moves into nuclear power, and now they're announcing that like they're gonna stop their. I don't know. This is my conspiracy theory. I don't buy it. I don't buy that it's random. That they make this announcement that they're going to be ramping up production starting in September of 2024. I mean, I don't know the time. Everybody knows the world revolves around the fucking U.S. presidential election. Everybody knows that that's a watershed moment for the entire fucking world. Our entire Middle East policy might change, on November 6th of this year. But Saudi Arabia and OPEC are hedging their bets on Biden and saying like, look, we're gonna ramp up oil production. Prices are gonna fall a month before the U.S. presidential election. So I don't know. I don't buy that it's a coincidence. The prince, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, is like this young guy who's like a nerd, and he's like obsessed with modernization. They're building like he wants to do all these like upgrades to their utility systems, and he wants to turn Saudi Arabia basically into the UAE. He like envisions a desert full of like highly technologically advanced cities and hotels and all this. They're building a city in the middle of the desert. He's dumping like billions of dollars into the construction of this like high-tech city in the middle of nowhere that's 118 kilometers like long. It's like a long city through the desert. There will be no roads and no cars in this city. It's entirely public transportation oriented. And again, this is the oil kingdom, and they're basically phasing out cars in their hyper technological cities. I don't know. I just think it's interesting the turn that Saudi Arabia is making, and really just putting all their eggs in the Joe Biden basket. It should be an interesting few years.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what they're doing. Like, it's no longer safe for anybody to roll the dice on Donald Trump, I think.
Well, I think just the chaos that comes with Donald Trump. I mean, you don't have to love Biden, but like the chaos, the global chaos that would come with. I mean, people know that basically Trump is a Putin guy. You know what I mean? Like that's the Russian if Trump wins, that's the Russiin ascendancy. In a lot of ways, the Chinese ascendancy as well. I mean, that's sort of the end of the United States as a reliable global partner. And like you said, Europe's already prepping for that. So
yeah, Europe's panicked. They're in full-on panic mode, which, to be fair, makes sense because Vladimir Putin gaining any more power impacts them far more like drastically than it does any of us. So
yeah. So let's get into this Trump conviction stuff. Donald Trump, now a convicted felon, convicted by a jury of his peers. Sentencing hearing is going to be on June 11th. Everyone wants to know if Donald Trump's
July 11th.
Sorry, July 11th.
I only know that because it's my dad's birthday.
July 11th. Everyone
he was convicted on the day my kids graduated from high school, and he'll be sentenced on my dad's birthday.
Everyone wants to know if Trump's going to go to jail. It's not. I mean, we're kind of in uncharted territory here with an ex-president being a convicted felon. He has been shitting all over the judge for months, and MAGA has been attacking the judge's daughter and all this, and the judge is in charge of sentencing him. So
yeah, that's a really poor choice on his end. Like, I'm gonna talk shit about the guy that decides whether or not I go to prison. That's just not responsible.
Ron Filipkowski wrote that in this type of crime, if there's no prior convictions, usually if you plead guilty or just accept responsibility and apologize, you can usually get off pretty light. But Trump has not done any of that. He's been extremely defiant and trashing witnesses and violating court orders and gag orders and just being a huge dick.
He's all any soon.
So I mean, the judge could throw the book at him and give him some jail time. But yeah,
I don't think he will, though. I think he'll give him home confinement, and I think home confinement on very specific circumstances with violations of any of these conditions resulting in jail time. Like, I think he's gonna, for the sake of just political.
Can they give him an ankle monitor? You have to walk
probably
around with
if he's on home confinement, he would have to have an ankle monitor. That is 100% correct. How funny would it be then if he's running for president from his like if he's actually basement Don this time? They talk about, Joe Biden in his basement. I'm like, well, Donald Trump in his home confinement. So
oh man, just the historical implications of this. So just a quick rundown on the case. So we don't know where we're at. So the jury found that he was guilty of basically it's sort of a form of tax evasion, like business tax evasion. He had Michael Cohen, who at that point was like his fixer, paying off these people, including Stormy Daniels, and Pecker, the guy who ran the National Enquirer, paying hush money to these people to keep quiet about Trump's affairs with Stormy and Playboy model Karen McDougal. And then the crime was that Trump reimbursed Michael Cohen and then tried to basically launder the money that Michael Cohen was paying to these people by filing fake business documents, fake invoices, trying to cover up the money that he was paying to Cohen, trying to make it look like a legitimate business expense. Essentially, he was laundering money for these hush money payments. And there was the campaign finance violation stuff in there too, talking about campaign expenses. So basically, white collar type stuff, money laundering type stuff, but serious. It's a serious crime there. So he's been convicted of that. This is the first of his many criminal trials. The really juicy stuff, Cathy, the stealing the documents and probably committing treason and the January 6th stuff. All that shit doesn't look like it's going to be happening before the election. So who knows?
Yeah, I know.
They got him on this one.
And the thing is, like, this one might actually be enough because you can see that it's kind of sinking in and I think this one being a state case is actually pretty important too, because the narrative is like, the Biden administration's coming after me and this is so terrible. No, they're not in this case. And like, no matter how many times you say it,
no, they're not.
yeah, like saying that in this case just shows that you're either not paying attention or repeating nonsense, because this has absolutely nothing to do with the Biden Justice Department. And this is, oddly enough, this is states' rights, man. States are allowed to, whatever. So it's going to be a fun line for them to try and walk. The cognitive dissonance is going to get fucking remarkable and off the chain, almost entertaining, I think. But you can already see that people kind of do respect jury decisions, right? Because they know that it's not a bunch of hired whatever people, it's just ordinary schmoes. And it's not a lot. Like, there are people doubling down on Trump as the nominee, but there are also the whispers of should we replace him, which will make the convention interesting because he's getting sentenced 4 days before the convention, I think. So
I'm pretty sure he'll use and the sentencing is before the debates too. I'm pretty sure he's going to use this as an excuse to drop out of the debates. But the interesting thing about this is just, how do you nominate a convicted felon? The hardcore MAGA is, saying that this is making him more likable and blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, it's not. Not with maybe with you and your cult.
Maybe with you and
with
your
the cult, exactly. It makes him like a legend. But not with middle America, not with independent voters, not with, the traditional sort of toss-up voters that you need to win an election, not the 20,000 people in that county in Pennsylvania that voted for Obama and then voted for Trump. Like, no, this is not appealing. People do not want to hand the nuclear codes to a convicted felon. The message that would send to the world. It's just, I don't buy it. I think this.
Well, the larger issue is convicted felons aren't allowed to enter the European Union. So how can you be leader of the free world and be banned from half the world? Like you can't go to meet with the world leaders you would have to meet with as a felon.
You've got
So
house arrest in the White House. Like he's not able to
yeah,
leave
so
the
like
fucking White
what
House.
all activities are going to need to take place within the US border, and like it's just I don't
He
know.
can't take his
Like
boot
the
off
point
to go.
is yeah, exactly. Like the margins for these elections are too small that it won't make an incredible difference. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I just think the idea that this is making him like more electable, that these people want to spin, and that's how you know that how far gone these people are, because that's like the
Mhm.
Fox line. I mean, this is like they're talking about this on Fox News, that like Americans now, more Americans support him because of his felony
Mhm.
conviction. I'm like, are you out of your fucking mind? There is no way. There's absolutely no way that that's true. It's pretty crazy.
I was trying to look up the guy's name because I couldn't remember it. It's Eugene Debs. It's
Oh
just another
yeah,
little like historical like points to make is that like we've had a criminal run for president before. We've had somebody run for
from jail.
president from jail. Um, but it was like in 1920, and it was like a former socialist labor activist who was serving time for violations of the Espionage Act for criticisms of the American involvement in World
Like
War
an
One.
actual political prisoner, like
And
like a
he
socialist that was arrested over like sedition charges. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, and there's issues with Eugene Debs if we really wanted to
oh
go
yeah,
into it, but the point is that like we've seen it before, but it was ridiculous then, and that was literally a century ago. So like whatever.
yeah.
Yeah.
So interesting. There's also this appeal that will, Trump's certainly going to appeal the conviction. Whether or not there's any kind of delay in sentencing or suspended sentence or anything like that is up to Judge Merchan. We'll see.
Yeah, I know.
But yeah, so very, very crazy stuff. He's also losing it. I mean, he's just really circling the drain. You could tell he's not well. He's not,
Yeah, I know.
he's aged a lot. He's just giving these rambling speeches. He's not making a ton of sense. I think it's really, all this stuff is really catching up to him. We talked about this
It
before.
is.
He right in the thick of campaign season.
Mhm.
He has all these trials and all this legal stuff to deal with. So he's not looking good. He's not looking
I
good on
saw
it.
like a thread on Twitter the other day, which was an interesting one. It was like a body language analyst or whatever,
Uh-huh.
kind of analyzing his the interview, the most recent one he did, where he did just look like a little bit of a broken and defeated man. But that was kind of like what he was going on, is that like, if you watch the the progression of his body language from the start of the trial to the conviction, you see a man that has been beaten down and he's losing and he knows it, and he doesn't know how to handle losing.
Yeah. Yeah, they were saying yesterday that he's his absolute, deepest fear was would be to be sent to prison. That's what he's been avoiding his entire life, is going to prison. So he's freaking the fuck out. So do you want to get into some generational breakdowns on this and how people are responding to this? And I really want to hear your generational take on this, Cathy, because this is like your specialty. So how the generations are going to respond to their take on this, their political socialization, and how the different age groups are responding to this. Gen Z is a trip, man. Gen Z is absolutely
Gen Z are my wild card right now. They're the ones that I've been trying to place the most on this one, but they are just very cynical and untrusting, and like he's convicted, but they still don't believe it. They think he'll weasel out of it one way or
Mhm.
another. You know what? So I don't know. It remains to be seen. There's still a very young political group, but it's the it's the ones that are loud and proud I want to talk about. We'll go boomers, we'll go Gen X, we'll go millennials. All right.
Oh my god!
Because
All right.
those are the ones that are easier to read. Like Gen Z are still very much in the throes of their political socialization, right? Whereas everybody else, we're socialized. I think we're pretty there.
For better or
Um,
worse.
for better or for worse. So um I've been kind of looking through this the last like couple days and thinking through like the who is it? Eric Erickson's stages of psychosocial development or whatever, and the timelines of when the political events that have kind of shaped these people happened. So, like, for those who don't know, generations are a little bit broken up almost randomly, but not entirely randomly, because they're usually marked by like social and political like changes or events, right? So like baby boomers, for example, are the post-war baby boom, the spike in population that happened after World War II. And I've always said that I think that the baby boomer generation is kind of like characterized wrong, because they take them all the way to 1964, which the reason they take them all the way to 1964 is because the Civil Rights Act 1960, that whole thing, right? And that is a pretty pivotal moment. And then they take Gen X all the way to 1980, which is like the Reagan Revolution, which is another big major thing. And then millennials are 81 through 96, which was the Republican takeover of Congress, Contract for America, right? So those are the political markers, if you think about it. So boomers were the babies of the 40s and the 50s, the children's and teenagers of the 60s, and the young adults of the 1970s. Okay. So they were in their teen years and early 20s watching civil rights, Vietnam, and Watergate. Okay. So they tend to be passionate in their opinions. Like the lines were in the sand were drawn very clearly for them. And they were either the straight-laced boomers that hated those stinky hippies, or they were the stinky hippies, right? But then within the stinky hippies,
a lot of them were very stinky.
Yeah. And then within the stinky hippies, though, something very strange happened, because as the 60s died down, hippies didn't have a whole lot of purpose, and a lot of them got swallowed up into religious movements. And that's why there were a whole bunch of cults in the 1970s. And the remnants
that generation is so fucking weird. Like, what other generation in their formative years just all went out and joined a fucking cult?
I don't know, man. But most of them are still in one, is the point, right? Because then when the cults kind of fell apart in the 1970s, there was the moral majority and the Christian right of the 1980s. So boomers have basically been born into chaos, reared into hysteria, and brainwashed into compliance. That is their generation. Okay. That is where they are.
Not a good combination.
It's not a good combination. And boomers at this phase are kind of either realizing that they've been, like, they're all kind of realizing that they've been lied to their entire lives. And half of them are doubling down on, no, I wasn't lied to. Everybody else is wrong. And this is all just conspiracy nonsense. And everyone's lying to you and blah, blah, blah. And all of the crazies. Right. And the other half are slowly coming around to like, okay, well, maybe there are some things I can learn. There are far fewer of them than there need to be. It's Gen X that's the most interesting to me right now. And I feel like I'm going to get yelled at, because every time I talk about Gen X, they yell at me, because
Gen X does not like you. They do not appreciate your sass. But they're also very sensitive.
Well, I mean, the irony of it to me is like the sassiest, most angsty generation in the world gets offended by my sassy angst. Like,
they're just
okay.
Yeah,
I know.
Gen X has a problem. Yeah,
they're just, well, I mean, to be fair. So here are my okay. So how I feel here is that like boomers are in denial and anger, right? Like that's kind of where they're going to hang out.
Stages of grief. Yeah.
Well, yeah, kind of, but it's more like they are used to seeing rich, powerful people, and especially politicians, get away with anything. So they are like being spoon-fed quite easily. Yeah, they're just targeting him because they don't like him, right? Gen X is kind of buying into that a little bit too. Like we expect that from the boomers, but I think like the reason people get frustrated with Gen X is because we expect more from you guys. But I understand why they're there. Okay, so I'm going to walk us through Gen X. So as a generation at large, this isn't true of everybody. Start yelling at me. But they're a cynical and distrusting generation, and they have every right to be, right? They too have seen everybody get away with something. Remember, these were the kids born in 1960s, so they were children for Watergate, which means that they're their middle childhood and early adolescence were recession and hardship in America. And then they were like teenagers and 20s for the Reagan years, which was like rah, Cold War hysteria, whatever, right?
Also, like like the children of divorce, you know what I mean? Like the divorce rates like
Right.
skyrocketing. They were the
Well,
first generation that like really had to deal with like broken homes in
there's there's like
in an actual sense, like, not growing up with one parent or whatever.
yeah, because I was going to get to that next. So, like, not only did they see this like decline in political efficacy, right, but they have a very kind of limited and poor understanding of how the government works. And this is true right-leaning Gen X and left-leaning Gen X, right? Because their lack of trust, it might be directed differently, but it remains regardless. And that kind of cynical distrust is what fuels their perception of politics. Okay. But there's an arrogance that comes from this generation because, to your point, they're the latchkey kids. They had divorced parents. And because of that, there was a wave of parentification in this generation, like older siblings kind of being in charge of younger siblings, kids kind of being left to figure things out for themselves. And when you figure something out for yourself, you tend to get protective of your understanding of it, whether it's right or not. And a lot of the people in this generation learned, or finger quote, figured things out at a point in their development where they were too naive to fully understand it, or they had poor or incomplete information because, the middle school, high school age fucking kids, right? Gen X didn't go to college in the numbers that millennials went to college in. So a lot of the things that they were probably taught, because again, also 70s and the 80s, American education was not the most structured and, cared about. So a lot of these people didn't learn a whole lot of history except for what they managed to figure out themselves. So a lot of their perceptions of the world are rooted in just what they were able to figure out for themselves as young people, and then ignored everything that could like correct them, and are kind of married to those opinions now. So they're all very kind of stubborn and sensitive. So if you like criticize them and say, yeah, I understand why you think that, but it's kind of based on something wrong, well, then they kind of revert
They will
to that,
bite
like,
fucking head off.
they will bite your fucking head off, even if I'm like, no, I understand what you're saying. However, this is an incorrect thing, and if you change this, then we can move forward. No, I can't believe you'd say that. But that's the defensiveness that comes from like the trauma of raising yourself. If you're on your own to figure things out on your own, that's like a defense mechanism is kind of built into your personality at that point, and any criticism is taken as an attack. And Donald Trump is like that in a lot of ways, which is interesting. But their whole generation is like that, which means that if they feel attacked whenever they're criticized, they're going to be very sympathetic to Donald Trump saying he's being attacked for being different. So what he's a little bit doing is playing on the known insecurities of that generation to win them over. And that is,
He's the most Gen X-y boomer. I mean, he's technically a boomer, but he he seems like he's a Gen Xer in just the way he carries himself. But yeah, those two generations are the like very much, and Gen Z is this way too. And I'm sure you're coming to this like, but millennials are the outliers here, in that we actually like respect institutions, and we think that like people are basically good. Boomers and Gen X are sort of defined by their distrust of government and feeling like everybody's out to shit on them, and just being paranoid, essentially paranoid
and the irony of that
at the system.
I know, and the irony of that is that if anybody's been fucked over by the system the most, it's millennials. But
yeah,
it's fine. Whatever. I just work here. But no, the reason Donald Trump comes across as very Gen X-y is because he's an 80s guy, right? That's who he was. Like his entire personality is based on when he became a big, fancy playboy, which was in the 80s.
Celebrity.
So he embraced the culture of the 80s, and the culture of the 80s was the like there were two types of 80s culture. There was the angsty, rebellious Gen X, and then there was the, greed is good Gen X. And Donald Trump is the greed is good Gen X with the personal angst of the rebellious Gen X. So he's just like the worst of the 1980s, all made into a fucking person. But millennials, I feel like there's a weird hope with millennials. Like we want to see, and I think it comes to the George W. Bush's administration really fucked us over as a generation. Like, we are still economically recovering from the administration of George W. Bush. But I think millennials, in a sense, felt rescued when we elected Obama, right? Like, it was so bad and we were so fucked, but we voted for Obama and everything's okay now. And that's how we felt going into it. And we shat the bed really bad because we figured once we put Obama there, everything would be fine. And everything wasn't fine because we stopped paying attention and he needed our help still because Republicans hated him. And so we left him a little bit to swim on his own. And that's our fault there. But I feel like millennials kind of have this hope now that, just like we did in 2008, saved the world from the recession by electing somebody better. I feel like because if you remember, before the economy exploded, there was a real likelihood of John McCain actually getting elected. But once the economy crashed, nobody was voting for a Republican. And I feel like in the millennial world right now, we a little bit feel like that. Like, I understand that last week there might have been a chance for Donald Trump, but nobody will elect a felon, right? So I feel like that's kind of what's going on in the millennial psyche right now, that they're hoping, because like you said, there's still a weird hopefulness in that generation that at the end of the day we'll do the right thing. Whether that bites us in the ass or not remains to be seen, because of the X Factor, which is ironically Gen Z. The X Factor is Gen Z. How funny is that?
The good analysis I read on it was that there's basically two different types of ideologies and political ideologies and generations. There's the civically minded generations and there's the ideological generations. And the millennials were much more in line with like the greatest generation in our civic behavior and in our belief in institutions and civic responsibility and running for office and changing the system from within and the trust in our institution. And there's obviously exceptions to all this, but the trust in the process and that things will turn out okay. I think it's because in our formative years, the Soviet Union collapsed and we grew up in the 90s where everything, like our worst problem was, fucking Newt Gingrich and,
But it was also
the pre 9/11 sort of world where like the US was dominant for about 10 years. And there were a lot of global conflicts, to be sure, but we didn't grow up with that fear and that paranoia about the Cold War and nuclear war and all that stuff that previous generations did.
But we did grow up with the paranoia about the Middle East. And that is why I think millennials are, and this is what I think we need to at least get better at with trying to convey to Gen Z, because I don't think they understand it, because they grew up with Middle Eastern conflict too. But the Middle Eastern conflict they grew up seeing was America aggressively starting wars and destabilizing the region. Whereas the Middle East you and I, millennials, grew up with was a destabilized region that, like, after the Cold War needed some managing, right? We were also more kind of tolerant of diplomacy because our formative years were, well, the older millennials were the Clinton years, and for younger millennials, the Obama years, where, again, we kind of turned to diplomacy for solution rather than aggression. So, like, the younger millennials were children for George W. Bush, which means they suffered the consequences, if you will, because their parents were impacted, but they weren't really paying attention to the Bush administration, whereas the older millennials were. So older millennials tend to be more tuned into what's going on, but more understanding of the process, whereas younger millennials aren't as tuned into what's going on, but are still willing to trust the process, if that makes any sense, right? But the frustrating part about that is it's the younger millennials that are better at communicating with Gen Z, but they don't know how because they don't have the context we have. So, like, we have the brain to help Gen Z, but we don't have the lingo. So if older millennials and younger millennials can get on the same page to talk to Gen Z to be like, hey, yo, diplomacy don't happen quickly, but, like, if done right, works wonders, then we can kind of win them.
I think Gen Z, it's like a nature versus nurture thing. I think Gen Z would be much more like the millennials had they not been, reared in the absolute shitstorm that has been the last 2 decades. I mean, they were born in the shadow of 9/11.
Yeah.
The recession happened when they were little kids. And now they've been living in the reality, and that now their college years have been, determined by the realities of Donald Trump and American fascism. And Like,
Yeah.
why, why should they be hopeful? They've never lived in a United States that was anything but fucking chaotic. You know what I mean? They don't.
Yeah.
That's
And
where they
that's
lose out. Is like millennials grew up, at least older millennials grew up with a sense of that hopefulness before all this
mhm.
shit went down. And I think we have this idea that we can get back to
Yeah.
get back to it, get back to the way things were. Whereas like Gen Z's never known anything but this kind of stuff, and
Yeah.
that's really defines their anger and their cynicism and their frustration because they don't,
Yeah. And
they
it's and
still
it's
they still will fight. They still will
yeah.
fight, and they still, they still have a moral compass, but just much more cynical, I think, than millennials are.
Yeah, and that's the weird thing about them is they have the cynicism and angst of Gen X, but the like engagement of millennials, which is so fucking weird. Like imagine being
Yeah,
both
yeah,
incredibly tuned into something and ready to burn it down at the
yeah.
same time. So that's the concern to me. But the other thing about them that I know just from having taught them for as long as I do is all they really want is to understand. Now, they're not trusting of a lot of people, but if you can win their trust, they will listen to you and they do want to understand. And they are very smart and they can come to understand. But they're also still developmentally very knee jerky, if you will. So, like, it's hard to
Hmm.
walk them through complicated nuance because they react like adolescents because most of them still are because you're an adolescent until you're 25 to be clear, right? Like your brain isn't fully developed until you're 25. So like you go through and you explain the complexity of Middle Eastern politics and you're setting something up and they hear something like, see, fuck it, I can't get on board with that. I'm like, pause. That's one piece of it right now. Like, but that's what's gonna be hard to get through with them. So I
I
don't
am just their engagement has always been
know.
what I've been most fascinated by, because like when we
Yeah.
were like we, politics is like cool to them. I mean, or it's part of their reality. Politics was like when we were kids, like none of our friends ever like sat around and talked politics. And like, at least,
Yeah.
I don't like it wasn't, it wasn't part of our existence growing up until like George Bush and then Obama. Like we came to it late. We came to politics late. I think Gen Z has kind of always been
They
immersed in it,
have
and they're
like
much more like they're much more involved.
yeah, like remember when we were kids, like the popular kids in school, right? We're the football players and the cheerleaders and like that was it, right? That's like it's the smart kids that are the popular
Yeah,
kids now,
yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
it's
That's
it's the
cool.
SG yeah, and like I it's fun to see happen, right? But it does also mean that they're making opinions about big complicated things a lot sooner. But it's also frustrating because they're too young to understand the patience that is necessary with a lot of these things, which is made worse by the fact that they've grown up with like this instant access to anything. Like it's hard for them to accept that things take time in a world where they've never had to wait for something. Like just internet, for example. Like you and I have more patience just because we heard ding 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 right to get on the internet, right? They never had to wait to get on the internet, right? If a page takes 12 seconds to load, they're like, fuck this shit, it's crap, right? Like 12 minutes to fucking get into AOL, if you recall, right? So that I think also fuels their inability to have patience. Like when we say, look, like I understand everything that's happening in Gaza is terrible, but it takes time to make these things happen. They can't understand that it takes time to make things happen because nothing takes time in their world.
Yeah.
And that is like that's the other thing that's going to be hard to convey to them. We should make them like bake souffles to teach them patience.
Yeah. Yeah. I want you to do nothing but slow cooker meals that take 12 hours.
Exactly.
Can
Do
you do
like
the AOL
12-hour
logging
chili.
noise again, by the way?
No, because I don't even think I did it right. I just think ding 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 ding. I can't remember, but
I'm
it's
gonna isolate that, and that's gonna be
don't. Why must you hurt me
your
this
new
way?
thing.
No.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
So
that's my generational breakdown of how people are reacting to all of this crap. Boomers are going to defend Donnie. Gen X are gonna feel attacked on his behalf.
just in
Millennials,
general, gonna feel
yeah,
attacked.
millennials are going to hold our breath and hope that America comes through for them just this once, just one more time. And Gen Z is a little bit in their Robespierre era.
Gen Z's bringing out the guillotines. They've had it.
Yeah, which
They
you know
are
what, I
done.
understand, but I will just say, go back and read your history because Robespierre loved the energy, but with no plan, you get Napoleon. So that didn't end better for the French people, is all I'm saying.
Somebody did a brilliant analysis of Beauty and the Beast, like the Disney Beauty and the Beast, and
Really?
how Belle made a huge miscalculation choosing the Beast over Gaston, just based on the historical timeline. Because we're pretty sure that the events of that movie take place in like the 1760s. So she's marries into this like aristocratic, mansion prince like a decade before the guillotines come out. So I don't know. It's
I don't
interesting.
know. To be fair, I saw a joke about Beauty and the Beast where it was like even Belle told us to pick the bear because Gaston is terrible, right?
Yeah, that's a
And
good one too.
she picked the bear
She did
because
pick the
that
bear.
worked out. She picked the bear. Worked out
Yeah.
for her. She picked the bear and got a library of books and the coveted library ladder that every book nerd girl wants. Right? If I had a
They even
room
went
with a
into detail
library
about like what
ladder,
happened to Gaston. Like he becomes like a muscadine, like these like reactionaries that like attacked the Robespierre people.
that is actually really
But yeah,
funny.
it's interesting.
That is actually funny. I find that entertaining.
Biden is on right now delivering a speech on his executive action. It looks like he's going to be taking substantial measures to shut down the southern border and limit access to asylum. So we'll see how this goes. Speaking of Gen Z,
Yeah.
Gen Z none too pleased with Biden's actions on the border so far. We'll have more details on this next week when
And see,
it's
that
fleshed
makes
out.
me nuts about them too, because I feel like, and this is the thing that I need to dig in more, and this is again off the cuff, just reaction to this. Bear in mind, don't yell at me. I feel like they're just mad at him about Gaza, so they're gonna be mad at him about everything. Because again,
I think
that's
they were mad
very.
at him before Gaza. I just think they want to be, they don't
I
like him.
think they're well. I don't think it's that they don't like him. Even I think it's just that they are. Remember when you're young and you're mad at the world, so you're mad at the world. Like everybody sucks. Like it doesn't matter whether they're good to you or bad to you. They're just wrong, right? So they see the world is fucked up. They don't understand enough about the world to know why it's fucked up. So they're just going to react to everything as being angry, right? Because they're mad at Biden for his actions on the border. I would guarantee you they don't understand his actions at the border. Some of them maybe do, and yay for them. But like,
Well, it's
I just don't know.
the criticism of Biden is that he's been too lax on the border. I don't know how I don't know how those two things could be true at once. Like Gen Z's hitting him for too much, for being too hard on the border, which categorically, I don't think you could say that before this. We'll see what comes out of this policy shift. But before this, I don't think you could say in any sense that Biden has been too tough on the border. I think
I think the kids are
he's had a pretty lax border
frustrated.
policy.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think the kids are just frustrated in general, and I don't mean to call them the kids, okay? Like, but
The young adults.
It's because I teach
And
them, and they're all my babies. I think,
like I said, they have every reason to be. They have every reason to be
yeah,
pissed off. I don't
and I
blame them at all.
understand it that they're angry, but I also know that anger with organized effort can be very helpful, but anger for the sake of anger can be destructive, and I just hope they have the right kind.
Indeed.
But anyway, that's what I got. That's what I got for the day.
Thanks for a great conversation, Kathy. It's always good to hear one of your generational deep dives.
Love it.
Stay tuned. We're having more deep dive content on the shows coming up in the next few weeks and months leading up to the election. Donald Trump, a convicted felon, remains to be seen if America is prepared to back a convicted felon because they think Joe Biden is too old. And give a convicted felon the nuclear codes. So we'll see.
Can
We'll
you
see how that goes.
imagine? Oh my God, I hate it here.
Thanks everybody for joining us today. Check us out on Patreon, patreon.com/just-buy-less-coffee. $5 a month, get access to behind the scenes content, pre-show conversations that don't make it onto the regular shows, exclusive deep dive content, exclusive guest interviews, all that good stuff. If you're listening on the audio podcast directories, Apple, Google, Spotify, make sure you're clicking the download button, download the episode to your local device. That helps us out with our numbers. If you want to see the video content, you want to see our pretty mugs and Cathy's new decorated podcast office room, which looks really, really good. Head on over to YouTube, Just Buy Less Coffee. You can see the most recent video editions of the episodes. Thanks everybody for joining us today, and we will see everybody next time. You've been listening to Just Buy Less Coffee, answering the deeper questions of American politics, featuring Troy Matthews at Keep Troy Blue and Cathy Cannon at Cannon's Fodder. Follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Threads, and X. All opinions are our own.